My name is Eric Mintel. By night, I'm a professional jazz musician, but by even later at night, I investigate the paranormal. I, along with my team at Bucks County Paranormal Investigations, travel the country investigating all things paranormal. This is Bucks County Paranormal Investigations. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Bucks County Paranormal Investigations. We are in part 2 of the Rendlesham Forest UFO Incident, and thrilled to be talking with Charles Halt, Chuck Halt, from Virginia today about the incident. We just told you about what actually happened in the first half. Now, the second half, Bill and I are going to go and talk to Chuck about the ramifications, the aftermath of this incredible UFO incident. And Chuck, thank you again for joining us today.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And my pleasure.
Why don't we go from right after that? You had just alluded to that.
This is one of the things. This is one of the things. When you hear the story from Chuck, when you hear the whole story, it's how in the aftermath of these 3 days, when the intelligence services moved in to manipulate the story, and I find that, and as you said, Chuck, that's even more fascinating than the actual incident itself. So we're turning it over to you. What happened afterwards?
Well, nothing much happened for the first 2 years, as I mentioned earlier in the program. It wasn't until 1983 when my memo got released. And a little bit of background there on the memo. Larry Warren, we need to talk about Larry a little bit because he does figure into this. Somebody did some stuff with Larry. I don't know whether he at one point told me he was drugged and hypnotized too, but I think he's just become, what do you want to call it, a wannabe actor? Put himself into the screen. And it's pretty clear that that's the truth now. It's out everywhere. Everybody knows that. But he got discharged. He got an honorable discharge, what never should have been an honorable discharge, and it had a secret code that meant he could never re-enlist in the military. He could never get a security clearance, and nobody's ever been able to decode that code for me. Tell me what it means. Just here's the results of it. He went back to the States. His paperwork was very interesting. A lot of it's in his book. For instance, his discharge paper is signed supposedly by the Wing Commander Gordon Williams. Not a signature. There's a stamp that says signed. Well, I know for a fact, in fact, Gordon Williams, the exec from that time, was recently a house guest here, and we talked about it. He said, and I knew Gordon Williams would refuse to have a stamp. He personally put his signature on everything. So somebody altered a document. Who? It had to be somebody with some clout, trust me, to do that. Don't know. But anyhow, Warren went back to the States with an honorable discharge and started running his mouth to various people. And that's how Greenwood and Fawcett got in touch with him through some intermediaries. And they started on a book. They contacted me. And I said, I got permission. I said, can I talk about it? And everybody said, well, why not? It wasn't classified as far as we were concerned, although there's an awful lot of stuff that was behind the scenes. So Fawcett and I talked, and I said, I will help you with the book, but all I insist upon is in writing, you stick to the truth. No nonsense, no, we're not going to glamorize it, just here's what happened and so forth. He agreed. So I sat down and made a tape. That's where people say I had a second tape. I made a tape for them, like I'm talking to you now. Everything I knew about it, I put on the tape, and I sent it to them. And Barry Greenwood still has a tape, I think. So they got all excited, and they started with Warren, and they figured out that he was a fraud.
Wow.
Interesting.
Peter Robbins picked it up. Now, why did Peter Robbins pick it up? Peter Robbins had suspicions, I think, from the very beginning. And he stayed with it for 30 years, despite me and a whole lot of people telling him, showing him evidence. When it finally just got so overwhelming, Peter had to back up, and they pulled their books. And there were more than one book, by the way. There were several books he wrote. And admitted, in fact, I have a real nice apology that I won't share with you because it's kind of personal. But apologized to me in writing, and
wow,
it's just something kept him going. I have a feeling that somebody in the background may have had something to do with that. I don't know. I'm not saying that's a fact. I'm saying Peter's a smart guy. For him to stay with Warren, who was a druggie and had drinking problems and lied through his teeth all the time, why would he stay with him? That's the first question I have to say. Anyhow, Warren then fades out of the picture, and they do their book. not long after the incident occurred, apparently one of the senior security police officers, not an officer, an enlisted type, J.D. Ingalls, who visits a lot of the local pubs and for music and drink and whatnot, starts spreading stories around about underground facilities and little green men, or well, they were actually bubble-shaped little men. This is where Larry Warren picked up a lot of his story. It's this information. He was probably tasked by the security police commander who took it from OSI or who knows who else. And he's going all the different pubs and he's talking, and he runs into a guy that's was a roommate with Brenda Butler, one of the three authors of the Sky Crash book. Mm-hmm. So they start writing a book. Of course, they drove me half crazy because they just kept pestering me to death. They'd call me, they'd come to my office, they just wouldn't leave me alone. I even gave them some disinformation a couple times just to get rid of them once. I was just so frustrated with them. But anyhow, I find out that the book comes out, and I read the book because, of course, I'm very interested in what they have to say. And there's something interesting in the book. It says that Jim Princeton, under an AKA name, contacted them in October 1983 to tell them about the story. Now, here's several interesting things about what he tells them. First, he says it happened on the 27th of December, the night he went out. Actually, he was out the 26th of December. My memo had a typo in it. I mean, I'm the first to admit that. That date also appears in his notebook that he had. Says the 27th of December, and people say, why? Well, that was 2 months or 3 months after my memo came out, which tells me the notebook was not written until after my memo came out with the dates of the 27th on it. Also, Airman Bertolino rode the bus back to the base on the night of the first incident with Princeton. He sat next to him. Princeton took out his notebook and made a sketch in the notebook showing him what the craft looked like. So, there's only one sketch in there of the craft in the notebook.
And you saw that sketch?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Only one sketch.
Was the sketch anything like Jim described it later?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, if you go to YouTube, and you'll find a program that Jim and I did in 2003. Invasion at Rendlesham is called. MPH Productions did it for, I think, Sci-Fi Channel. And Jim and I are there. Now, I've been back 3 or 4 times with Jim, and we always went to the same site. The same site I was taken the first night. The same site, the pictures in Georgina Bruni's book of the cops out there. The same place where my pastor cast came from, because we took soil samples and showed calcium carbonate.
And the same place where you and I were for UFO hunters.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, guess what? When we do the filming for the 2003 production, we go out the East Gate and take a right turn and go down into the forest.
But it was left at East Gate.
What? Pardon?
Wasn't it left at East Gate was the turn you took?
First you go down the East Gate Road, then you take a right on the Forest Service Road about 150, 200 yards, then you take a left into the forest.
Okay, fine, yeah.
But when we go out this time, Jim takes us out the gate and immediately turns right and goes down into the forest. So this is where it happened. I said, Jim, and this is on the tape. Go look at the program. You'll see. I said, Jim, this isn't where you've been taking me all these years. This is not where I was. He said, well, there must be 2 sites. It gets better. He shows the notebook. The notebook has his notes in it that were obviously, in my opinion, done later. There is no code in the book and no apparent missing pages. By your own conclusions.
So he's taking you to a whole nother site.
Well, it gets better. Read the Rendelsham Enigma. Yeah, gosh.
It's a mouthful.
There's a 3rd site now where it supposedly occurred. Go read the book and look at the diagram. Now we have 3 different landing sites. What's going on?
Right.
I don't understand. It's just too many things don't add up. I've got about 50 more things, but I want to put them in writing, and I will share it with you a little later on.
Sure.
But there's something wrong. In Brenda Butler's original notes from the meeting in 2003 for Sky Crash, when she meets with Jim at his assistance, he tells her they never got within 50 meters of it. Now, when he was brought into the office and I debriefed him, he told me the same thing. He told the base commander that. He told the wing commander that. Never got within 50 meters of it. He says they tried to approach it and it moved. There was never any mention of a bubble. You hear about a bubble now.
Right.
So I don't.
What about touching the craft? What about touching the craft?
I'm firmly convinced that whenever they took Jim in, the spooks did, and debriefed him, they created a whole lot of, what do you want to call, screen memories?
False memories, maybe, or something? Okay.
That's the only thing I can think. But so many things. One of his plaster casts, if not both, mysteriously disappeared. There are all sorts of things that just nothing. Things that individually, one of them or two of them may be okay, but when you put all these things, start putting it all together, somebody in the background has a great deal of interest in this.
Why do you think, just in your opinion, because you've been through this now for, what, almost 40 years, so why do you think the reaction from the military and the intelligence services was so immediate and desperate to cover this up?
Well, you know, there are people actually in the military that specialize in disinformation, deception, disinformation. I can remember in Vietnam all the tricks we pulled. I remember during Tet, we flew C-130s over Hanoi and dropped toys in plastic containers with messages on them and leaflets and all kinds of things. It just, there's a real specialty of this. And they're very sophisticated, I'm telling you.
Well, you were instrumental. I have to say, you were instrumental in one of the events of the Vietnam War on a Christmas night or a Christmas Eve night when the North Vietnamese thought they could send a whole convoy of trucks down the Ho Chi Minh Trail because, like George Washington at Washington's Crossing, they figured we would never do anything. But you and other officers lit up the entire Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we stopped that convoy.
Well, what happened was, at that time, they were dropping flares from the C-130, but what they were doing is they were dropping the ramp down and walking back, pulling the cord, and throwing them out. What we did is myself and my sheet metal guys, we built a big ramp that held, I think it was 7 or 8 flares, and they even had a release mechanism with bungee cords so they could selectively or continuously do it much safer. Because what it really brought that to our attention is that one of the incidents, the guy pulled the cord on the flare and dropped it on the ramp, and burned the airplane up. So we made 4 or 5 of those ramps, and that's what they were using. We had the operation, we called it Blind Bat, the C-130 with their flares. And then the fighters, of course, would come in behind. We'd drop all the flares and bombers and, you know, obliterate anything on the ground.
I spoke to an F-4 fighter who described the entire event and said it was like shooting fish in a barrel with because it was so well lit.
Well, it was daylight.
Yeah.
Incredible. So when you go back to the story and think of all the different scenarios that are going on here, what in your mind, you know exactly what you saw, you experienced what you experienced. What do you think is the outcome of this? I mean, why are they trying to do this? To embellish the story?
They're trying to put the story in such a light that, you know, everybody kind of has a chuckle. You'll have to admit, if you read Warren's book, it's fantastic the way it's written. It'd be a great novel. If they'd have said it was fiction, they could have probably made a movie out of it. In fact, his life is even more interesting. There's a lot of things in as far as his, how shall I say, memorabilia stuff. He's done all kinds of interesting things. It's quite a character.
Well, Larry Warren also told a story about Jackie Gleason and Richard Nixon.
Oh, I know. He knew John.
To the Air Force Base in Florida.
He knew Elton John. He knew everybody. And he sold their jackets and coats. He sold guitars for $100,000, which was later turned out to be a fraud, and all sorts of interesting things. So, but I don't dwell much on him anymore because he's pretty well clearly proven as a fraud. Although he and a couple of people in Great Britain are making a film now, but it's not going to go anywhere.
So your life after, when did you retire from the military? How long had you been in the military after Rendlesham?
Oh, I stayed till 1991.
Okay.
Now, I did a program while I was still on active duty for Unsolved Mysteries. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I saw the program.
Absolutely, sure.
It was their highest rated program they ever did.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyhow, before I did it, I was working for the IG. And I went to there, DOD IG personally. I said to Derek, who was acting then, I said, I've been approached by Unsolved Mysteries and Robert Stack to do a filming. But I need some clearance. What do I do? And he said, tell me about it. So I sat down and for about 35 or 40 minutes, ran him through everything I knew. He said, do it. Okay.
That's good.
Now,
So you reported to the Inspector General that there was a UFO incident at one of the most top secret NATO air bases that held nuclear weapons, and he said go ahead and do it?
Oh, I never said what kind of weapons we had.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, right. You did never mention that. That's for sure. I remember seeing that episode too, and I thought, this is incredible. And I've been literally following that since that came out. That was the early 90s, I guess.
1990, I think it was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, even more interesting is when I left the military, because my clearance is way beyond top secret from when I was in the DOD IG, because we got into a lot of space-related stuff and things we don't talk about. So the two debriefers that debriefed me, because I got a personal debriefing, we went through all sorts of stuff. And I said, well, how about Bentwaters? The incident happened at Bentwaters. They said, what incident? I said, well, there was a supposed UFO incident I was involved in, and I got a lot of notoriety that I didn't want. And, he said, one said to the other, what? I said, yeah. And they said, don't worry about it. You can talk about it. Just be careful what we told you earlier about certain other things. So I felt free to talk.
What do you think now about the Navy pilots coming out with all of the these tic-tac UFOs on radar and things like that? It seems like they're a little bit more forthcoming with information.
I think there's a gradual movement toward disclosure. Mm-hmm. That's the feeling I get because there was a time when those guys would have been shut up and sit down.
Yeah.
Because keep in mind, the air traffic controllers at Bentwaters that were in the tower the night I was out there didn't talk about it. Because they knew from past experience, one of their coworkers at another base had talked about UFOs he saw, and guess what? He got decertified and became a cook, a baker, or a mechanic, or some other such thing.
Wow.
So, and that's why the cops were reluctant to talk about it. After I started doing a few programs, I've had probably 20 or 30 different cops and different people come in and tell me stories. This happened in 1986. This happened in 1975. And there were even incidents where they claimed they actually shot at UFOs over the weapons storage area. To no effect, of course.
Why do you think UFOs would be surveilling the weapons storage areas?
I thought that exclusively for a long time, but now there's still continual things there. The big nuclear power plant just north of the base, it's only 20 miles, maybe less than that from the base. They have multiple sightings and still do. There's something about that area, I think, and we probably, how should I say, made it more interesting when we were there. But there's something about that area. There's a lot of strange things. People see strange things happen. You may have heard me say that Butley Village, just up the road, is just a stone's throw from the base. That's the British home of witchcraft. Does that tie into something to the local? World War II initial radars, the experimental radars, were just down at RF Bodsey, just down the coast a couple of miles. All kinds of interesting things there. Orford Ness, where the lighthouse is, that's where the British did their nuclear triggers for their bombs during the Vietnam time or before, and a lot of other experimental stuff, highly classified stuff. It's a strange area with a lot of interesting history.
Do you get a chance to get back much to the area?
Oh, yeah, I've been back. I was back twice last year.
Yeah.
I still got a lot of friends in the area.
And the funny thing about Orford Ness, because it's right on the North Sea, it's that where Britain was invaded during the 8th and 9th centuries, that whole area.
Something interesting you may like to hear. Gordon Williams and I have kept in touch through the years after he retired. And he always joked with me a little bit. He died last October. I didn't know it at the time. Nobody notified me right away, but the former wing exec knew him quite well. He had been at Bentwater for 5 years, and Gordon Williams was probably the best wing commander we had in forever and ever. He was a fantastic guy. So he called me up and said, I'd like to go to the funeral. He's living in England, or was living in England. He retired with his British wife. He said, I'd like to go to the funeral, but I really can't afford to spend a whole lot of money. I said, well, Park Simpson is his name. I said, I'll tell you what, you fly over, I'll pick you up at the airport. I'll put you up, feed you, take you to the funeral, and take you back to the airport. So the only expense will be your flying plus miscellaneous stuff. So he came. And so we went to the funeral. Most interesting. His wife was there, his ex-wife. They got divorced not long after Bentwaters, but she confirmed a lot of the stuff in the story. What really got me was on his deathbed in October, he had his two of his 3 adult children present, and he unloaded on what was the truth about Bentwaters. They told me about it. They didn't tell me the details. So it took me 4 or 5 months to get them to finally come to sit down with me and tell me what he said. First thing they did is bring out a 5-page non-disclosure statement to ask me to sign. And I did. I said, but the agreement was that I wouldn't talk or tell people such as yourself the whole story, but I would know personally. I signed the agreement, and then they reneged.
Wow.
They told me the equivalent, he said to me to keep on. The equivalent. That was it. So I've contacted them several times, and they refuse to cooperate. They're going to write a book.
Now, what about your book? When's your book coming out?
Oh, well, I don't know. I'm not in a big rush to get it out. It's just going to be a supplement. The first book, John took license and put a whole lot of other stuff in there. I mean, you have to wade through 200 or 300 pages of other stuff.
Well, for the last few minutes here, I just again want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Tell our viewers where they could see you. I know you've got some speaking engagements coming up, and you've got some news that you're going to have at some of these speaking engagements, and maybe you could tell us some about that.
I'm only going to do 2 or 3 more, and that's it. I'm going to go to the MUFON conference in July, end of July. I'm going to go to Roswell for the 4th of July.
Okay.
And go to Contact in the Desert, which is in June, as I remember.
Right.
Bill, I think you're going to that one, aren't you?
No. I'm going to
November in Pittsburgh, I believe.
I'm going to Pittsburgh in November for the Pennsylvania MUFON, and actually in April or May or June, I'm not sure. It's coming up this spring. It's the Philadelphia MUFON conference. I'd love to have you there. Come out to Philly.
Well, I have been invited.
I'll make sure you get invited.
I know John. I've worked with him a couple.
Yeah, I mean, I'll call John.
We met very briefly there at that conference when Travis Walton was there as well. That conference, that was a couple of years ago. But what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that your information's on there so people could see some of the background info of this. And again, thank you so much for taking the time and for making this historic event available, as reluctant as you were to make it available, but it's there, and I think it's going to be talked about for many years to come. Well,
I'm pretty much done talking about it. I've said it so many times. I'm not in this for attention. I'm not in this for money, just to get the truth out there. Because there's so much disinformation, so many wannabes, so many distorted things, so many people have changed stories. It's just...
What do you think, since you've had personal experience with this, which is fascinating. I mean, you're an eyewitness, number one. You're a first-hand witness. 2, you were in the administration of this whole event for all the years that followed it. Why do you think that people have to make things that are strange enough on their own even stranger and weirder and actually manipulate the story? I mean, why do you think that's the case?
I think it's driven by a lack of attention. They want something to be involved in something. They want to get their name up there in lights, so to speak, or get on TV. Believe me, I've turned down an awful lot of things, unless it's something legitimate. I've been disappointed in so many programs, and I'm not talking about you personally, Bill, but so many of the programs glamorize things and changes the story, and they edit things to sell it, so to speak.
Well, that Unsolved Mysteries was great. That was great.
That was an incredible episode of Unsolved Mysteries.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And here, question: do you still have the plaster casts?
I do.
And has anyone done any more testing on them?
No. I have every piece of correspondence in almost every book that relates to it, and I've saved all. I've got emails going back to 1980 and you name it. And I go back through that stuff and I pick up clues. When I put this together with that together, I realize.
Oh yeah, it's you're putting a puzzle together still after all these years.
You know, the thing that's fantastic to me too is this incident would have had to have gone to obviously the British government, the MOD and higher, and two, it would have gone to the White House. I mean, this was Jimmy Carter's last month in office. Ronald Reagan had just been elected the month before. The Soviets had invaded Afghanistan by December 1980. And what's fascinating is I'm just wondering if that's just another story that hit the Carter White House after Jimmy Carter himself had a UFO sighting when he was in Georgia and was purportedly told in the Oval Office to keep his mouth shut about it.
Well, I'm convinced that most of the presidents don't know the whole story, the whole background, and are not kept well informed. They don't have a need to know.
Well, you remember, and when you said you talked to Bill Clinton, he discovered a government within a government.
Oh, yeah. Bill Clinton actually said there was a government inside the United States government that covered up stories like the Kennedy assassination, like the crash at Roswell, things like that.
No doubt about it.
Well, you know what? We're gonna be talking about this for a long time to come. But thank you so much for being with us today, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Bucks County Paranormal Investigations. The interviews today with Chuck Halt and the Rendlesham Forest UFO Incident. And stay tuned. We've got a lot of great guests coming up this season. So thank you again.
Thank you, Chuck. Happy New Year.
Thanks, Chuck.
Same to you. Look forward to seeing you all again.
We're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you. It's still moving from side to side. And when you put the star scope on it, it sort of has a hollow center, a dark center. It's like the pupil of an eye looking at you and winking. And the flash is so bright to the star scope that